So we're back in our study with David, the life of David, part 9. We've gone each one of these sermons. We've said like the God of this or the God of that, the God of the tear, the God in the rut, God in the wilderness, the God on the chair. Speaking of the throne, and today we're looking at the God of the table. Everybody in here has a table. I was for some reason, Googling. I chase rabbits in my head, and man, I don't know what I would do if I was like an adult in the 80s. Because I have so many questions that Google, how old is Jimmy Buffett? Bam, I can find that answer out in like 5 seconds. But a long time ago, I'd be like, I don't know, and just move on, right? Because nobody knows how old Jimmy Buffett is. But I looked up some stuff about the table and chair. And the table and chair is one of the oldest and most important pieces in the home. Like when you move into a house, if you get all your stuff in order, if you have all of your furniture in place, but you don't have a table, you're going to feel like, I don't really have everything because I need a table. So maybe it's older than 3100 BC, but some people say it's about 3100 BC that the Egyptians decided that they needed to make something that they can put stuff on above the ground and they can sit at and play games at and eat and that kind of thing. At my house, I do a lot of work. I do a lot of sermon prep type stuff at our table. We solve problems sometimes with, homework. We have some videos of some of our kids of just having a train wreck of a problem with homework. We have meals together. One of the most foundational things that you do as a family is you share a meal together, and you do that at the table. You make plans. If you have something going on in your home with your family, whatever, you say, let's sit down and talk. And you maybe sit down in the living room, but sometimes you sit at the table. I was thinking of the saying, just a seat at the table. That saying, have you ever heard anybody say, well, I might not be important enough. I don't really have a seat at the table, that kind of thing. That's this concept that you're a part of the conversation, that you matter, that your influence or your impact or your input actually matters in whatever that situation is. And so tonight we're going to look at the God of the table. Now you're thinking, all right, where are you going with this? So God's table, God has a table of grace is what we're looking at. We're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 9. God's table of grace is a place where you and I have been provided a seat. We have a seat at the table of grace, and we are going to be so thankful for that at the end of tonight. You're going to be like, hopefully, maybe even you look at your own table different. So we're going to look at the God of the table. As I think of a seat at the table, just that concept of maybe being in like an important room with important people, and people maybe have saved me a seat, I'd be like, I don't belong here. Like when you think of grace, of what God has done to you, He's brought you to Himself and saved you a seat at His table, maybe sometimes you're like, man, I don't deserve to be in His presence. I don't deserve grace. I don't deserve to be at the table. And then God looks at us and says, it's okay, you're with me. You belong here. If you go somewhere with a famous person, I don't have any stories about this. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a famous friend who goes to famous things, and they're like, I don't belong there. It's okay, you're with me. When we're at the table of grace, we can say, yeah, okay, maybe I feel like I don't belong here, but I'm with God. And He's made me a place at this table. And He saved me a spot. And it's really, really good. So tonight, we're going to be talking about God's table of grace. We're going to be looking at grace and maybe a different angle that maybe you've done before. And it's one of my favorite stories. When God was placing on my heart to go through the life of David, this is one of the stories I was like, I'm really looking forward to this. It's one of my favorite stories in all of the Old Testament, all of the Bible. So let's pray, and then we'll jump into 2 Samuel chapter 9. God, thank you for your word. God, thank you for all that you've done in my heart and the hearts of so many that are in this place right now, God, just through how you've changed the way we think and the way we see around us, just through the working of your word in our heart. God, would you do that tonight? God, would you remind us of grace tonight? God, we need a reminder. We need a refresher course on grace tonight. And as you've saved us a seat, as we're just twisted and lamed up, but you have us a place at your table. And we're welcome there, God. Thank you for that. God, remind us of that tonight. We love you, and we pray this in your good name. Amen. Just a little bit of background. It's been a few weeks. We did some Christmas stuff. So we've had kind of a break in between some of our David talks. So, David, he was a shepherd boy. God picks him out of Jesse's lineup. Jesse's got all these kids, and Samuel shows up and says, none of them. What, you got anybody else? And Jesse's like, I got this, young curly red-headed kid in the back, but he's with the sheep. Nobody really cares about him. Samuel says, bring him out, and God picks him. God picks him to be the future king. And after that, we don't hear much a lot. We don't hear a lot about David until we get to David and Goliath. And Saul is king, and Goliath, you know the story. David fights Goliath, and he slays Goliath, and Saul gets a little bit jealous, just a little bit, a lot bit jealous. If you read the story and you paid attention, Saul gets a lot bit jealous, and he wants to kill him because people are saying David has killed and slayed 10,000 people, and Saul, he's done like thousands, and Saul is the king, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. He tries to kill David many times. David gets away. David runs. David has an opportunity to lose a little bit of integrity and kill Saul, but he spares him, and so those kind of things happen. Jonathan is Saul, and this is important to the story tonight. Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan and David become knit together at the soul. It's like a covenant friendship. It's a friendship that probably none of you have. You don't have this, like, it's more like a marriage friendship, but they're not like married. They have this covenant friendship. This friendship that they're knit together at the soul. Basically, Jonathan tells David, hey, I'm going to be your man. I'm going to be your friend forever, but you need to promise me something. Though my line or my house, we might all fall away, you need to promise me, and you can look at this in 1 Samuel 20. David basically makes a covenant with Jonathan, and Jonathan says, don't destroy my family line. Just don't destroy my family line. And David's like, sure, promise, kept. But you know, as David grows and becomes king, and we talked about how last time we were talking about David, he got to where he was very powerful, and he's the king of the land. Jonathan, Saul, and they've been dead for a while, and David's taken on the Philistines, and he's winning. He beats the Philistines, and he's very powerful, and he's the most powerful person in the world at this point. So we come to 2 Samuel chapter 9, where David is to that point where he's still kind of, maybe he's still resting a little bit, like he's conquered his enemies. He reigns upon the throne of Israel, Judah, all of God's people. He's the head honcho. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, we pick up, so pick up with me 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. And David said, so he says, and David said, is there anyone left of the house of Saul that I might show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? So you with me on that? So David had a covenant with Jonathan. Time has passed, and it's gone on, and David is reigning and ruling comfortably, and he's like, wait a minute. I had this promise to my best friend Jonathan years and years and years ago. And so one day he says, is there anybody left of the house of Saul? Which Jonathan is from the house of Saul, right? He said, is there anybody left of the house of Saul that I might show that person kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. So now Ziba is serving King David. Ziba served King Saul. This guy is probably very consistent and faithful throughout both houses or both lines, both king, family line, that kind of thing. So Ziba is called up. And King David said to him, are you Ziba? Anytime the king calls you in, anytime the king says, hey, you need to come before me, anytime that happens in just about any monarchy, in any kingdom that you could ever study in any part of world history, this is a scary business right here. He says, hey, go get that Ziba guy. He is left from the house of Saul, the previous line. Everybody in the room is thinking right now, Ziba's dead. Because he's from he served the previous king, the previous house, the previous line. He served Saul. He says, and they said, there's a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. What else would he say, right? And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I might show him kindness, the kindness of God to him? Now that probably threw off Ziba, probably threw off anybody else listening. Ziba said to the king, Ziba or Ziba? I don't know, you can say it whatever you want to say. Ziba said to the king, there's still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet. So basically, Ziba shows up in the presence of the king, and he's kind of confused, kind of nervous, like, oh man, I'm a dead man. And he says, is there anybody left of the house of Saul that I might show him kindness? And he probably relaxes a little bit. And then he mentions that, oh yeah, Jonathan did have a son, but he is totally worthless. Forget about him. So that's basically what he's saying. He says, there is a son of Jonathan, but he's crippled in his feet. Now, a long time ago, and this is kind of sad, but anytime in Jesus' day and time, if you were blind or if you had leprosy or if you had any kind of problems, you were worthless. Like you would get kicked out of your house sometimes, but you got to stay out on the street. Like you can't get an education, you can't get a job. So basically, Ziba's saying there is this one son of Jonathan, but he's crippled at his feet. And you can find the story in 2 Samuel chapter 4, where so Jonathan and Saul, so it says in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. So when he was 5 years old, the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, about them in battle and dying. So his nurse took him up and ran and fled from her, and in haste he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. So that's Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And he's crippled in his feet because when Jonathan and Saul died, news came back to the hometown, and there was a panic, and nurse, whoever her name is, nurse picked up Mephibosheth. He's 5 years old. I can barely pick up my 5-year-old because he's like 65 pounds. I usually throw him over my shoulder sometimes. And she starts running, and she falls and busts that little boy up pretty bad, bangs him up pretty bad. That's Mephibosheth. So this is kind of setting the stage for us with what's going on. Back to 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 4. The king said to him, now the King David's talking to Ziba. He says, is there still anybody left of the house of Saul for Jonathan's sake? Ziba says, yeah, Mephibosheth, busted up, banged up, worthless, piece of nothing. That's who you want. Take him out. It'd be fun. Everybody will celebrate. You kind of flex a little bit as king, right? You're going to go up and show, hey, remember Saul, remember his line, and remind you that I'm king now. I'm going to take out one of his sons that's hiding out. The king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lodabar. Now, if you're in that room and you hear this conversation, you just kind of like, oh, you just gasp. For one, Lodabar is where you go to get away. It's a rural, podunk, hick town. Nobody cares about Lodabar. Nobody wants to go there. Lodabar actually means place without pasture. So even its name says, man, they can't even grow sheep here, basically is what we're seeing here. So the king says, where is he? Ziba says, Lodabar. And David's like, Lodabar? Ain't nothing happening in Lodabar. Verse 5, then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lodabar. Now, when it says he sent him, David has this entourage. He's got this little caravan. He says, all right, hey, go to Lodabar, load up some people, get the banners waving down the road, get some dust cloud behind you, get some chariots, that kind of thing. Go to Lodabar, head down over there. And he says he sent for him. So they said, go get him and bring him here. So King David brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, Lodabar. Got that? Verse 6, Mephibosheth. Don't you just love that name? There's some good names here, right? And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. Why would he do that? Because he knows the predicament that he's in. He's hiding out in Lodabar, trying to stay away. David says, go find me somebody from the house of Saul. Mephibosheth's like, man, I'm hiding out in Lodabar. Nobody goes to Lodabar. There's no vacation homes there. Nobody's showing up here. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came and fell on his face to pay homage. And David said his name, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I'm your servant. And he's not arguing. He has nothing that he can answer for. He's hopeless right here. And David said to him, do not fear. Why does he have to say do not fear? Because he's scared to death right now. Mephibosheth knows. Look, they had to drag me out of my house, my busted feet, because I can't even walk, because my feet didn't heal well. He's scared to death. He's like, man, my whole life has been a crippled mess. It's been worthless. It's been nothing. And now the king wants to kill me. And the king says, don't fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father, Jonathan. Now, other gasp just happened in the room if they didn't know what was going on. He's going to do what? Show him kindness? Show him grace? He's going to do something he doesn't deserve? Nobody would have argued or nobody would have said anything if David said, hey, everybody, this guy right here, this Mephibosheth guy, I think that's how you say your name, from the house of Saul. Take him out back. Actually, take him in the courtyard. Let everybody see. Split him in half. remind people who's boss around here. He's not what he did. He says, I'm going to show you kindness. I will restore to you the land. What? All the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always. He crosses enemy lines, and he basically adopts Jonathan's son Mephibosheth as his own. He says, I'm going to restore everything that's been broken, that's been lost, I'm going to bring it all back to you. Ziba's off in the corner like, what? What in the world's happening? He's thinking, everybody else is like, he can't even walk. What are we going to do? We're going to have to get somebody to drag him around, and he's going to have all these lands restored back to him. He's going to have all this kindness and this grace, and we got to set a place at the king's table for him now? This is good stuff. And what was Mephibosheth? What was his response? It says he paid homage. That's just this position of just like surrender and worship. It's just saying like, now David's not my enemy, he's my hero. And I'm just going to fall down and worship the king. He paid homage and says, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Everybody knows Mephibosheth is worthless. Mephibosheth knows it too. He even calls himself a dead dog. Then the king called Ziba. Saul's servant said to him, all that belongs to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. Talking about Mephibosheth. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him. So now, Ziba, you work for Mephibosheth. And shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons, 20 servants. He's a prominent guy. And Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servants, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. What grace. And I love it. He didn't deserve to be at that table. He's staying at the table always. Like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both of his feet. I think it's interesting that it reminds us that, hey, this Mephibosheth guy, he's still pretty banged up, pretty worthless still. As I read this, and I just see so many amazing things that we can talk about, that the king of the land shows us that he's also the king of grace. And he's offering this gift. Mephibosheth didn't earn this, didn't deserve it, didn't even buy a lottery ticket for this. It's not like his name was pulled out of a hat or something. He went and found him, and David set a place at his table, and he said, always, you will always eat at my table, no matter what happens. Now, here's what you could do. You can read ahead. You can read ahead and learn a little bit more about Mephibosheth. There's not a whole lot more. Why? He can't contribute anything. The only thing he can contribute is later on, it gets connected with, Ziba shows up a little bit and David shows up. We probably won't get to it. But Mephibosheth's like isn't taking care of himself. He's like not cutting his toenails. And David's like, you're not taking care of your beard and your toenails. Like you're just not taking care of yourself. So we never really see that Mephibosheth turns into this general and his feet get better. But he still always sits at the table of the king. So when we look at this table of grace, that gets this gift that is extended to this undeserving person, that's the first thing we need to call our attention to is the table of grace. Number one is extended to the undeserving person. If anybody else were to assess that situation and they say, all right, who really deserves this? Who deserves some type of kindness and grace from King David? Most people would probably say, well, probably Ziba. Ziba's not really related to Jonathan or Saul, but he served faithfully in his house, and he's serving in your house. He hasn't deserted. He hasn't abandoned. He hasn't started some coup or anything like that. It seems like Ziba should be the deserving one. But that's not how grace works. What grace does, grace finds the undeserving person and says, I will give you a remarkable gift that you did not deserve. The table of grace, the chair is pulled out of the table of grace, and it says, right here is where you sit, and you are not deserving to be here. not deserving to be here. When we think about grace, we have to realize that we don't deserve any of it. You're borrowing God's air tonight. You don't deserve to take your next breath. And it's by grace that you even work right now. I'm not talking about your job. I'm talking about like functioning as like a, A&P type stuff, like your eyes and your heart and your brain and your lungs. That's only by God's grace. Your skin hadn't fallen off. It's kind of weird. But what do you deserve? What do we really deserve? If it weren't for grace and we would get what we do deserve, we would be in hell tonight. We'd be in hell right now. If God, which he does, he knows what we did, what we thought, and what we said last week, and you woke up today. That's pulling a chair out at a table of grace and says, yeah, you're still banged up a little bit, but this is still your spot. You don't deserve it. God is a God of grace, and I'm so thankful. What we often do is we twist him a little bit and try to make him a God of merit, where you have to earn it, you got to work for it, and you better be good or you're going to get hurt. That's not really how grace works. What grace says is, I'm coming to find you. You're worthless. You're helpless. Nobody cares about you. You're in podunk rural hick town Lodabar trying to stay away from everything that's anything. And I'm going to find you, and I'm not going to rip you in half and throw you in a pit. I'm going to bring you to my table and adopt you like one of my sons. That's crazy that God would do that. That's crazy that David would do that to Mephibosheth. And I am blown away that God would even consider me, to let me walk out of this place tonight on feet that aren't just crumbling into powder, because that's what I would deserve. And when we get to where we realize how undeserving we are, there's a lot that should happen in our heart and our mind. We should find a little bit more joy in the good things that we have that God has provided us. We should be a little more grateful. We should be like, wow, amazing grace is in my life. It's amazing. Romans 5:8 says, but God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. What does that mean? God showed the full extent of his grace through the death of his own son, Jesus, which Jesus didn't deserve to die. We deserve to die that death. And he said, no, instead, Jesus is going to die, and you're just going to sit at the table. And we prop up and lounge back and kick over the king's stuff and eating his snacks and getting junk all over our crumbs all over us. Like we have totally lost track of the grace of God in our lives. We kind of like fiddle with it. Yeah, we brush it off under the rug like it's not that big a deal. Y'all hearing me on this? We don't deserve God's grace. We're undeserving. We don't get what we deserve. The table of grace is extended not only to the undeserving person. Number two, the table of grace is extended to the undeserving person from an unlikely place. Lodabar. Sometimes people ask me, what's home for you? I'm going to start saying Lodabar. People say, where are you from? I don't really know, honestly, because I moved around so much when I was a kid. I don't have any roots. Like my mom said, we moved 11 times before I was 11, and I don't remember any of those homes. Pretty much, I don't really know what's wrong with me. I don't know. Where are you from? That unlikely place, Lodabar. God goes to Lodabar, and the king pulls. No one goes there. I was telling somebody one day that was from Russia. I was going to Moldova. You probably don't know much about Moldova. Moldova is a little bitty country in between Ukraine and Romania, ground zero for human trafficking. It's just a mess. It's corrupt. It's awful. It's poor. It's a bad place to go. She was from Russia, and she knew that I was going over to Eastern Europe on a mission trip. She's like, where are you going? I said, Moldova. She said, no one goes to Moldova. I said, the grace of the king does. I'll go. Nobody goes to Lodabar. Mephibosheth was out of mind and out of sight in Lodabar. He was forgotten because he was useless. He was worthless. He was pathetic. He was hiding. He was broken. He was hurt. He knew that he was in trouble if he poked his head of that little hole that he dug himself in. Doing his thing in Lodabar. You're from Lodabar. Unworthy place without pasture, just full of shame. That's where Mephibosheth is from. He didn't deserve a place at the table of grace. Romans 3:10-12, it's written, no one is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. What does that mean? We all start in Lodabar. We got no chance. We're undeserving, and we start out in an unlikely place, far away from grace, far away from the table of God's grace. But God, the King, Jesus, he comes to us, says, you're undeserving, and I'm going to come and find you at a Lodabar, of all places. So the table of grace is extended to the undeserving person from an unlikely place. Number 3, the table of grace seeks out and finds the undeserving person. So you see in 2 Samuel 9:5, David sent for Mephibosheth. Did you see that? He didn't text him, hey, when you get a chance, can you come over here? No, he went and found him, brought him to himself. King's banners coming down the road. Mephibosheth, I don't know if he could walk. Maybe he's dragging around, he hears something. Looks out the window, just sinks. Sees the clouds, sees the horses, sees the banners coming down towards him. He's like, I'm done. I've had a horrible life. Nothing's worked out for me. I've been useless, helpless. Now I'm dead. But that's not what grace says. What grace says is I'm going to find you. And the King of grace says, I'm going to bring you to myself. Jesus sought me when a stranger wandering from the fold of God. That's a line from a song, right? Jesus sought me in the street, wandering from the fold of God. You know that song? That's me and you, far from God, doing our thing in Lodabar, busted up, broken in every way. But the King of grace comes and finds us, the undeserving person. He seeks us out. Isaiah 65:1. Listen to this verse. It's a really good verse. I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. We just read in Romans where it says, nobody even seeks for God. Why? Because we don't have what it takes to make our way up to God. We can't scratch our way up to him. We can't work our way up to him. We can't do enough, be good enough. We can't deserve anything at all towards him. So he has to come and find us. And his banners come down our road and our driveway. And if we understand the situation, we can look out the window and say, we're toast. We're going to die. And then he brings us. He takes us out of our place, out of Lodabar, worthlessness, helplessness, pathetic. Takes us out of that place, and he brings us before himself. David brought him to himself. What did Jesus say in John 15:16? He said, you did not choose me, but I chose you. That's the story of somebody getting tackled with amazing grace, realizing how jacked up and pathetic they were. And then Jesus, in his grace, while we're weak and crippled and useless, comes to us, finds us, brings us to himself. What was it like when the banners of the King came down your driveway? Not to destroy you, but to deliver you. Not to crush you in Lodabar, but say, I'm going to take you out of Lodabar, and I'm going to put you next to me. I'm going to adopt you as my child. You're going to eat at my table always. So undeserving. The table of grace calls the undeserving by name. Notice what happens. The first thing happens, Mephibosheth just falls down, and David, the king, calls him out. Exclamation point. Mephibosheth. Now, David's a pretty passionate guy. He might have yelled at him. He was excited to see him. Why? Because he knew in his heart what he was about to bestow on this worthless creature. He knew in his heart what he was about to do. He was excited. He's like, I'm so glad you're here. I'm about to bust you up with some goodness. That's what he's like, hey, Mephibosheth. And everybody's like, why is he excited? Because he's about to split him in half. Mephibosheth isn't happy. Nobody else is happy but the king. He falls on his face before the king. Why? Because he has no rights. He's got no hope. He's got no shot. It's over. His future is in the king's hands, and the king just go, poof, squish him. Dead man. That's what Mephibosheth thought, right? Says, I got the wrong name. I'm from the wrong house. I'm from the wrong line. I'm finished. First Colossians 1, 21 through 22. And you, he's talking to us. We were once alienated in Lodabar. We were alienated, hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. He is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present us holy and blameless and above reproach before him. What grace says, as Mephibosheth is standing there looking at the king saying, I got the wrong last name, pal. Grace says, you do have the wrong name. And then grace says, but I change names. And that's what God does in his grace. I've seen this happen all the time, where the grace of the king tackles people and it changes their life. Somebody's name, somebody's identity, somebody's who they are at the core lost, and God says, I'm going to my grace is going to change that to found. Lonely to loved, broken to restored, shameful to forgiven, rejected to accepted, from a scrap eater in Lodabar to an adopted child of the king that always gets to eat at the king's table and gets to eat his food forever. That's what a king does. He calls names out. That's what grace does. Grace says, I'm going to find you, I'm going to pull you to myself, and I'm going to look at you and be like, new name, new future, new identity, new hope, new reality. Here comes this bulldozer, of grace that's just going to change everything. You know what happened to Mephibosheth after that? Nobody's like, aren't you that loser from Lodabar with the busted up feet? You know what happened after that? All of Ziba's servants and all of Ziba's sons be like, we're here, Mr. Mephibosheth, what you need? That's the grace of the king right there. It's a game changer. Changes people's names from tired to rested, from scared to hopeful. Somebody's name is never measuring up, and grace changes that name to confident in Christ. The table of grace is set, and it calls the undeserving by name and changes their name. Next, the table of grace makes an incredible offer. Incredible offer. There's David. Mephibosheth's plopped down. Can't stand up very good, right? Mephibosheth, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bulldoze your house in Lodabar. That's not you anymore. I'm going to show you kindness. Hey, show him kindness? Such a gracious gift. Think about the greatest gift you ever received. Do you remember it? Like on earth. Do you remember the greatest gift you ever received? You forgot, didn't you? I forgot. As I typed that up, I'm like, And if you've ever given me something nice, I'm sorry. I didn't like recall it right away. Come up to me later and be like, remember I gave you that motorcycle. Oh yeah, that's the greatest gift. Like, I'm sorry. Like, what's the greatest gift you ever received? You know what, Mephibosheth, the rest of his life, when David walks by, there goes my hero. I mean, he understands the weight and the gravity of such a precious gift. He's not perfect. David says, I'm going to show you kindness. And then he restores his land. Now, when I think of that, like that's a gracious gift that's continual in grace. So what God does is God doesn't bring us out of Lodabar, out of our podunk rural hick town that worthless and helpless. He doesn't say, all right, I'm going to get you out of there, and I'm going to put you over here instead. See you later. No, he doesn't do that. This continual grace, the grace of the king, because he gets to sit by the king all the time. And he says, all right, have you tried that yet? That came from, Nova Scotia. It's a good biscuit, right? Just kidding, they wouldn't probably have that. It just keeps getting better. As our kids that were younger, they'd They get really excited about birthdays and Christmas because they're going to get some gifts, right? You know, you've seen kids get really excited. And then if you're a parent, you've gotten your child a gift and they're really excited about it, but then like the luster wears off really quick, right? And like they're not excited really quick. And you're kind of like, man, what's your problem? Dude, that's a banging gift. You just throw it like you're not excited anymore. Sometimes I feel like we lost our joy and our excitement on the free gift that God has given us in salvation through the grace of the King that says, hey, you get to sit at my table. Be reminded, man, don't lose sight of the appeal that grace has in our heart. Because you'll be restored. You'll always eat at my table. Always. He says always. The King says, as long as I'm alive, this is not going to change. He didn't have some kind of contract. Say, hey, Ziba, if you don't take care of Mephibosheth, you can't take care of your beard and cut your toenails really good. You're out of the seat, man. He said always. It's secure. When the grace of God comes into your life and changes your life, you know it, you remember it, it's not going anywhere. You didn't do anything to deserve it. You can't do anything to lose it. You can't do anything for God to be like, yeah, your feet are still kind of banged up and they stink. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not doing what I want you to do all the time. You're out. Find somebody else they can sit here. They're still worthless. They're still talking and acting like they still got that Lodabar twang. I'm tired of hearing that. God's not like that. And I'm thankful. I'm glad. You know what I'm also glad about? When I find my place, my seat at the King's table of grace, and I pull up and I sit across from him and everything is okay and in order and in shape and everything's going to work, especially for my future. One of the best things about it, I still got busted feet, but he can't see my feet because the table's in the way. Yes. He doesn't even notice my feet. And if I'm like, man, I got feet problems, he's like, what problem? You ain't got no feet problem. I don't see any feet problems. Well, I don't see any feet problems. I see a really good steak. She's talking about feet problems. And he whispers, he says, that's what grace is. Grace covers up your problems. I'm not going to bring up your feet all the time. I'm not going to show, like, hey, everybody, here's busted feet, boy. 10th year in a row gets to come sit at the King's table. The King basically adopted someone who he had the ability and the authority to destroy, and maybe even the right to. That's grace upon grace upon grace. Imagine it like this. So you're in a desperate place in your life, and you go to the bank, and everything, your relationships are broken, your finances are broken, and you see a Lambo sitting there. Somebody hopped out of it and went inside really quick, and they left it running, the keys in it. And you had a lapse of reason, you had stupid something, you were misfiring on a lot of cylinders, and you're like, I'm about to take that Lambo. And you hopped in that Lambo and you screeched all. You just stole somebody's car. You're like, I'm going to get away from these cops. I'm in a V12. And you're flying and you can't steer that thing. You can't drive that thing. You get outside the city limits just a little bit. Next thing you know, they're behind you. You skip up off a curb and go through a yard and bust into this big house right through the front. And there's like a couple of people in the living room and you just like nail them and they're hurt and the cops are in there and you're shaken up and you know time passes by. Next thing you know, you're in the courtroom. You're thinking, what have I done? And I've made some stupid, terrible decisions in my life. And you're shameful. You're guilty. It's on camera. You're going down. All rise, the honorable judge, show and show, whatever his name is. He walks up onto the bench and you are like, are you kidding me? Because you stole his car. And it just so happened that you didn't just steal his car. You crashed into his house by some crazy chance. You got no shot. No shot. You're going down. In some pathetic, desperate move, you stole his car, crashed into his house, you tore up his stuff, his car, his house, and you hit his family in there. It got real personal. And everybody's sitting in the courtroom like, this idiot's going away forever. He's got the authority to make some decisions. He's going away forever. You're going to forget about him. Throw away the key. And then that judge says, I want to introduce everyone in the courtroom. This is my oldest son. He's in law school. He's going to be a judge one day. He comes into the courtroom and says, I understand that most of you won't understand this. This won't make any sense to you. But instead of the guilty person receiving any type of punishment, I'm going to let my son go to jail, and I'm going to adopt him, and they're going to come be in my family, and I'm going to fix my house, and they're going to live at home with me, and they get to eat at my table always. Nobody would think that was a good. Everybody would be like, what is wrong with the judge? The judge has lost his mind. But really, that's what God has done. Like, we have stolen from him. We have spit in his face. Our sin is horrible, horrific, nasty in every way. And we've peeled out, and he's watched us go, and we've climbed up on the curb, and we have smashed him, and we have hit him in the face, and we have done all kinds of things. And he looks at us and says, acquitted. My son is going to take all of their punishment. That is grace. That is what Mephibosheth is receiving in this moment. That is what you have received. When you received salvation, when you have the free gift of salvation through the grace of God, you don't deserve it. In fact, you deserve the opposite. You deserve to be put away for a long time. But then God says, I'm going to put his punishment on my son. And everybody's like, he did nothing wrong. That's the point. Jesus didn't do anything wrong. You sold a Lambo. That's why a lot of people say that when you really understand and unpack the grace of God, it's just ridiculous, scandalous. Nobody would do that. Wild and crazy and bonkers. No judge. Like, that's a story that I made up. That would never happen. But it happened to me. And I didn't steal a car, not a Lambo. But I received the grace of the King. What's the response? What do you respond? How do you respond to this? If this is true, how do you respond? What's the logical response to hey, you're going to sit at my table always. You deserve to be ripped in half and thrown out with the garbage, but instead I'm going to adopt you like a son. What's the response? What's Mephibosheth? His response was, it said he paid homage, just fell down in humble worship. Wow, I don't deserve this. He said, who am I that you should show regard? I'm just a dead dog. He didn't think he was anything special or great. He knew what he had coming to him. And he was blown away at the invitation to come sit at the king's table. Now, here's the thing. In this room, right now, there are people that understand what I'm talking about. You've tasted this grace. You should be a little bit more blown away at it. I need to be a little bit more taken back by it. I need to get a little bit more humble worship. Because, when we look at this story, like this story of Mephibosheth, like if you're a believer in this room, like you realize that we just went through your story. You didn't deserve anything from the King of Grace. And he said, yeah, I know that. We're not talking about that. Because you get to sit. You see that table marker, little table tent with your name on it? That ain't changing. That's my story. That's some of your story. And that's the gospel. Jesus, he walks in and says, I'll take it. I'll take the punishment. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't deserve any type of punishment. But I'll take it. So how should you respond? Commitment, devotion, worship, showing a little bit more grace to others, maybe showing a little bit more mercy to others, showing grace to those closest to you, your coworkers, your friends, your kids. So where are you at today? Then I'm done. Where are you at right now? Just thinking through this, as if you were to place yourself right now. Are you in this miserable place, scraping through in Lodabar? Is that where you have been for a while? Is that where you are now? You're not sitting at the king's table. Or maybe you are at the king's table. Maybe your guilt has been taken away and the reality that your feet are always covered at the king's table. Where are you today? Find some grace today. If the king is coming to you and calling you by name, just think if this, you know how this story would be different? If David was like, Mephibosheth, call out his name, and he was like, what, bro? I ain't trying to hear what you're trying to say. You know how the story would go? David would be like, all right, later. That's not what he did. He just buckled under the weight of grace. And then he received that offer. You need some grace today. I need some grace today. Is the king calling you today? How would you respond? How do you respond? Now, I want you to look around. There's some empty chairs. I think there's too many empty chairs. There's empty chairs at the table of grace, too. So what do we do with that? If you've actually tasted grace, if you've actually been restored and redeemed, and you scoot that chair up at the king's table, then I think we have a responsibility to let some other people know about the grace of God. We should. If we don't, it's not amazing grace to us. It's a side note in our hectic lives and our busy schedule. It's supplemental, not fundamental to who we are. It's time that we really live and operate in the grace that we've received. If you're here today and you've never responded in faith to the grace of King Jesus, then today is your day. Don't leave here again saying, I just don't know. You know? Well, we don't know. I mean, when I was in high school, I had friends die young. Recently I had somebody that I knew who was younger than me. They didn't make it. Like, you don't know when your time is up. But we have time today. And I think the grace of King Jesus is calling somebody's name. So what do you do? I think we should all respond to the grace of God today. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to take a few minutes, 45 seconds or so. You can interact with however God is leading you. And then Bradley's going to come up and close us.